The small town of Black Hollow had always been a quiet place, the kind of town where people left their doors unlocked at night and neighbors gathered for Sunday barbecues. But everything changed when the Miller twins, Emma and Caleb, vanished without a trace. It started as an ordinary evening. The siblings had gone to a local bonfire party deep in the woods, a popular gathering spot for teens looking to escape the watchful eyes of their parents. Witnesses said they left together just before midnight, heading down the dirt trail leading home. That was the last time anyone saw them. Their parents, the ever-distraught Mr. and Mrs. Miller, pleaded on every news station, their tear-streaked faces begging for any information. The town rallied together, organizing search parties that scoured the dense woodland, but there was no sign of Emma or Caleb. No footprints, no torn clothing, nothing. It was as if they had simply vanished into thin air. Then, 3 weeks later, they returned. Or at least something that looked like them did. The entire town gathered in front of the Miller house the night Emma and Caleb stumbled back into town. They were barefoot, their clothes torn and dirty, their bodies covered in bruises and scratches. Emma's once vibrant blue eyes were hollow, sunken deep into her pale face, while Caleb's hands trembled uncontrollably. They told a terrifying story of being abducted by a group of masked men who had kept them locked in a pitch-black cellar, feeding them just enough to keep them alive. They spoke of whispered threats, shadowy figures lurking in the darkness, and the constant feeling of being watched. The town was horrified. The police launched a full-scale investigation, but despite their efforts, they found no trace of the supposed kidnappers. The media latched onto the story, portraying the twins as tragic victims of an unspeakable crime. But something about their story didn't sit right with Detective Julia Harper. Harper had been a cop for nearly 15 years, long enough to know when someone was lying. And there was something off about the way Emma and Caleb recounted their ordeal. The details shifted ever so slightly each time they were asked to recall what had happened. Emma would claim they were chained to the walls, while Caleb would insist they were free to move within the room. The number of captors changed, sometimes 3, sometimes 5. And the way they spoke about their experience. It was almost rehearsed. Something was wrong. As days passed, the town showered the twins with love and sympathy. They were given free meals at the local diner, townsfolk offered to do their shopping, and their parents received generous donations to help them recover. But behind closed doors, strange things began happening. Neighbors reported hearing bizarre noises coming from the Miller house at night. Low, guttural whispers, followed by sudden bursts of laughter. Mrs. Miller, once the picture of a devoted mother, was seen wandering aimlessly through the streets, her eyes vacant and unfocused. And then there were the animals. Stray dogs and cats started vanishing. People would wake up to find their backyard pets missing, their collars left behind in odd places, dangling from tree branches, buried in shallow holes. The town chalked it up to wild animals, but Harper wasn't convinced. One evening, she decided to pay the twins a visit. The Miller house was eerily silent when she knocked on the door. Mrs. Miller answered, her hands trembling as she ushered Harper inside. The living room was a mess. Clothes strewn about, half-eaten meals left untouched, the air thick with a metallic scent that sent a shiver down Harper's spine. Emma and Caleb sat curled up on the couch, their eyes fixed on the television. The screen was filled with static, yet they watched it as if entranced. "I just have a few more questions," Harper said, pulling out her notepad. Emma turned to her, offering a weak smile. "Course, detective. Anything to help." Harper hesitated. That smile. It was too perfect, too deliberate. "Can you tell me again what happened after you escaped?" Caleb's fingers twitched. "We ran," he said softly, "through the woods. It was dark and we were scared. We didn't stop until we saw the town lights." Emma nodded. "We barely made it." Harper studied them carefully. Their words were right, but their body language. Emma was calm, too calm. Caleb, on the other hand, kept glancing toward the staircase, his knee bouncing rapidly. "What about the men who took you?" Harper pressed. "Any new memories? Any faces?" Emma's smile didn't waver. "Oh, it's all still a blur. There was a pause. Then, from upstairs, something thudded against the floor. Mrs. Miller stiffened, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Emma and Caleb, however, didn't react. Harper narrowed her eyes. "Is someone else here?" "No," Mrs. Miller said quickly. Too quickly. Harper glanced at the staircase. The air felt heavier now, suffocating. Slowly, she rose to her feet. "Mind if I take a look around?" Emma's head tilted slightly. "Why would you need to do that, detective?" Harper forced a smile. "Just being thorough." She took a step toward the stairs. Another thud. This time, accompanied by a faint scratching sound. Harper's hand hovered over her gun as she ascended the stairs. Each step creaked beneath her weight, the air growing colder the higher she climbed. At the top, there was a long hallway lined with doors. Most were slightly ajar, revealing dark, empty rooms. But one door at the end of the hall was shut, and something was behind it. A low, shuffling noise echoed from inside, followed by a sharp inhale, like someone gasping for breath. Harper's heart pounded. Slowly, she reached for the doorknob. Behind her, Emma's voice rang out. "You shouldn't open that." Harper froze. She turned her head slightly, finding Emma standing at the top of the stairs, her expression unreadable. Caleb stood behind her, his hands clenched at his sides. Harper looked back at the door. The scratching sound had stopped, but something inside was waiting, and it knew she was there. Harper's fingers hovered over the doorknob, her pulse hammering in her ears. The silence on the other side of the door was deafening. A moment ago something or someone had been moving in there. Now all was still. Behind her, Emma and Caleb stood rigid at the top of the stairs. Emma's expression was eerily calm, her lips barely upturned in what might have been a smirk. Caleb, however, looked pale, his hands trembling as he stared at the door. "You shouldn't open that," Emma repeated, her voice steady. Harper turned to face her fully. "Why not?" Emma tilted her head. "Because there's nothing in there." The detective didn't believe her. Every instinct told her that whatever was behind that door was something the twins didn't want her to see. And that meant she had to see it. Ignoring the tightening in her gut, Harper turned back to the door. Her fingers wrapped around the knob, its surface ice cold. Slowly she twisted it. The latch clicked. The door creaked open an inch. A sickly sweet odor rolled out, thick and cloying, coating Harper's throat. She swallowed hard, pushing the door wider. The room beyond was shrouded in darkness, but as her eyes adjusted, she saw the outline of something. No, someone, curled up in the farthest corner. A gasp caught in her throat. It was a girl. She was frail, her body curled into itself as if trying to disappear. Her hair was matted, clinging to her gaunt face, and her clothes, torn, filthy rags, hung loosely on her frame. Her breathing was shallow, rapid, and when her wide eyes met Harper's, something inside the detective twisted. Pure, unfiltered terror. "Jesus Christ," Harper breathed. "Who?" The girl shook her head violently, pressing a trembling finger to her cracked lips. "Who?" Harper's skin prickled. Behind her, Emma sighed. The detective turned just in time to see the teenager step forward, her expression shifting. The sweet, demure girl that the town had pitied, the one who had sobbed on television recounting her abduction, was gone. In her place stood something else entirely. Emma's lips curled into an almost amused smile. "I told you not to open it." Harper's instincts screamed at her to move, to run, but she forced herself to stay calm. Her hand drifted toward her holster. "Who is she?" she demanded, jerking her chin toward the girl in the corner. Emma's smile didn't falter. "Does it matter?" Caleb shifted behind her, his breathing uneven. Unlike his sister, he looked uneasy, panicked even. His gaze darted between the detective and the girl in the corner. "She doesn't belong here," Harper said firmly, her fingers grazing the handle of her gun. "She needs help." Emma sighed as if she were bored. "That's not really your problem, detective." Harper tensed. "Step aside, both of you." Caleb flinched, his shoulders hunching. Emma, however, remained still. Harper took a slow step forward, her pulse quickening. Now. For the first time, Emma's expression flickered. Just for a second. A shadow of something wrong passed over her face, twisting her features into something almost inhuman. Then she stepped aside. Harper didn't hesitate. She surged forward, grabbing the girl's arm. The girl yelped, flinching away, but Harper held firm. "It's okay," she whispered. "I've got you." The girl's lips trembled, her eyes darting toward Emma. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. Harper pulled her to her feet, noting how light she was. Far too light, as if she hadn't eaten in weeks. The girl swayed unsteadily, and Harper moved to support her. Then the girl stiffened. Harper barely had time to react before something slammed into her from behind, sending her crashing to the floor. Pain exploded in her ribs as she landed hard, her vision swimming. A step, a blur of movement, then a voice low and cold. "You shouldn't have done that." Harper groaned, struggling to push herself up. A sharp kick to her side sent her sprawling again, pain radiating through her torso. Emma crouched beside her, head tilted like a curious animal. "You know, detective," she murmured. "We really did try to play nice." Harper gasped for breath, her fingers twitching toward her gun. "Missa." In a flash, her hand shot out, seizing Harper's wrist in an iron grip. She squeezed hard. Harper gritted her teeth as pain shot up her arm. "Don't," Emma warned. Caleb hovered behind her, shifting nervously. His hands curled into fists, his jaw clenched. "Emma," he said hesitantly. "Maybe we should." "Shut up, Caleb." Emma's grip tightened. Harper sucked in a breath, willing herself to stay conscious. "What the hell is going on?" Emma studied her, then smiled again. "You really want to know?" Harper's jaw clenched. Emma sighed, releasing her wrist. She stood stretching lazily. "Fine. I suppose it doesn't matter anymore." She gestured toward the girl, who was trembling violently. "You feel bad for her, don't you?" Emma mused. "Course you do. That's what people like you do. You see someone suffering and you think, oh, how tragic. How awful." Harper pushed herself up onto her elbows, her body aching. Emma's voice darkened. "But what if I told you she wasn't the victim here?" Harper's stomach twisted. "That's not true," the girl whispered. Her voice was hoarse, barely above a breath. Emma chuckled. "Of course you'd say that." Harper looked between them, her mind racing. This girl, this terrified, half-starved girl, wasn't supposed to be here. She was hiding here. But from what? Or who? Emma turned to Caleb. "Tell her, brother. Tell her the truth." Caleb flinched. His lips parted but no sound came out. Emma's eyes flashed. "Tell her." Caleb swallowed hard. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "We weren't kidnapped." The words slammed into Harper like a freight train. She stared at him, uncomprehending. "What?" Emma laughed softly. "Oh, detective. Did you really think we were victims?" Caleb's shoulders shook. He refused to meet Harper's eyes. "We took her." His voice cracked. "Not the other way around." A cold wave of realization crashed over Harper. Her breath hitched as the pieces fell into place. The inconsistencies, the shifting stories, the missing animals. The twins hadn't been kidnapped. They were the ones who had taken someone. And the entire town had fallen for it. A slow, suffocating dread settled over Harper as Emma crouched beside her again, grinning. "Now," she murmured. "What are we going to do with you?" The girl whimpered. Caleb squeezed his eyes shut. And Harper knew, with bone-deep certainty, she was in serious trouble. Harper's head swam with confusion and fear. The truth was beginning to crystallize in her mind, but she couldn't quite grasp it, couldn't fully believe it. The twins, Emma and Caleb, had played the perfect victims, fooling everyone in Black Hollow. But now the reality was far darker, and far more sinister. "We took her." Caleb's voice echoed in her ears, repeating those chilling words. "Not the other way around." The girl in the corner, the real victim, trembled uncontrollably, her eyes darting nervously between the twins and Harper. She pressed herself further into the corner, as though she could melt into the walls and disappear from sight. Harper's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to reach out to the girl, pull her into safety, but Emma was still standing over her, her cold gaze locked on the detective. "Why?" Harper choked, struggling to sit up, her body still aching from the blow. "Why did you do this?" Emma's grin widened, her eyes gleaming with a malicious light. "Why not? It was easy." People are so willing to believe a sob story, especially when it fits perfectly into their little narratives. She stepped closer, her voice lowering to a dangerous whisper. "You think the world's full of helpless victims, don't you, detective? Well, that's just because you've never met us." Caleb remained silent, his shoulders trembling as he avoided Harper's gaze. There was something almost broken about him, as if he was stuck between guilt and fear. Fear of his sister, perhaps, or the consequences of what they had done. The girl in the corner spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please. Don't." She raised her hand as though begging for mercy, but her eyes remained locked on Emma, who now towered over her. "Don't what?" Emma sneered, crouching down in front of the girl. "Don't tell the truth." The girl's lip quivered. "We were just trying to survive." Harper's blood ran cold. "Survive? What do you mean?" The girl's eyes filled with tears as she finally spoke in a low, strained voice. They took me because they were hungry. Enough." Emma snapped, her voice suddenly sharp and commanding. "Don't you dare try to paint us as the bad guys." She shot a warning look at Caleb, who flinched. But the girl didn't back down. She lifted her head, her hands still shaking as she spoke with newfound resolve. "They kept me here, locked in this room for weeks. They said I was the one who would fix everything. They needed blood. She trailed off, her voice breaking. Harper's mind reeled. This wasn't just a kidnapping gone wrong. This was something far worse. Something ancient. They needed blood. Harper repeated, her voice hoarse. The girl nodded, her tear-streaked face looking utterly exhausted. "They were starving, detective. They weren't normal." She gasped, cutting herself off, her hand flying to her mouth as if she had said too much. Emma's eyes flashed dangerously. "You don't know anything. Shut up." Harper turned her gaze to Emma, trying to piece the puzzle together. There was something unnatural about the twins, something that wasn't just about their disappearance, but about the way they looked. Their eyes, their strange calmness, even the way they moved. It was as if they were playing a role, pretending to be human. "Tell me everything," Harper demanded, her voice steely. "All of it." Emma smiled, a wicked, predatory grin. "You really want to know?" Harper nodded slowly. She had to know. "Well," Emma began, "you see, we didn't just take her. Oh no. That wouldn't be enough. We needed her." Harper felt a chill crawl up her spine. She swallowed, her throat dry. Needed her for what? Emma leaned in close, her eyes gleaming with something that could only be described as hunger. "We've been starving, detective. Starving for power. For life." Harper's breath caught in her throat. "What are you talking about?" Caleb, for the first time, finally spoke, his voice small and fearful. "They promised us that if we kept feeding on her, we'd get stronger." He broke off, his voice cracking. Harper's mind reeled. The girl, they hadn't just kept her locked up for fun. They had been feeding on her. But not in the way one might think. It was worse. They wanted to feed on her blood, the girl said, her voice trembling with both fear and disgust. But it wasn't just about survival. They wanted something else. Something darker. Emma nodded slowly, her smile widening. "You're not wrong, girl." She turned back to Harper. "The truth is, we've been cursed. For years, centuries even. The blood we need is more than just nourishment. Power. And if we don't get it," she trailed off ominously. Harper's stomach churned. "Cursed. Emma didn't answer immediately. Instead, she circled around the room, her footsteps echoing through the quiet space. You can call it a curse or a blessing or whatever you want. But the truth is, we're not like everyone else. We're different. She grinned, revealing teeth that were sharper than they had any right to be. Harper's blood ran cold. She had been right all along. There was something otherworldly about the twins. Something unnatural. And the girl, the real victim, she had been caught in the middle of it all. The girl's voice trembled as she spoke again, more quietly this time. I didn't want to help them. I didn't want to be a part of this. Harper's heart broke for her. She could see now that the girl wasn't just another victim in a sad, twisted game. She was a pawn in something ancient and horrific. Then why did you stay? Harper asked, her voice soft. The girl's eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, there was a flicker of something human behind the fear. Because if I left, they would have found someone else. Someone else to feed on. She looked at Emma and Caleb, her expression filled with a mix of pity and fear. And it would have been worse for them. Worse for all of us. Emma stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. Enough talking. You're wasting my time. But Harper was no longer paying attention to her. Her gaze remained fixed on the girl, the poor, terrified girl who had been trapped in this nightmare. Don't worry, Harper whispered, her voice filled with determination. I'll get you out of here. Both of you. But as she spoke, Emma's hand shot out, seizing her wrist with a vice-like grip. You really think you can escape? You really think you can just walk out of here? Harper swallowed, steeling herself. I'm not leaving without her. Emma's smile widened, revealing even sharper teeth. We'll see about that. Suddenly, the room seemed to close in around them, the air growing thicker, colder. Something was shifting. Something horrible was about to unfold. And Harper wasn't sure if she would survive what was coming next. Harper's wrist throbbed under Emma's iron grip, her fingers tingling with a strange sensation that she was being drained, not just physically, but somehow from the inside out. The room grew colder, the shadows deepening, until they seemed to take on a life of their own, pressing in on her from all sides. Every inch of her skin crawled as if something were lurking just out of sight, waiting to spring. Her eyes flicked from Emma to Caleb, who stood rigidly by. His expression a mix of guilt and fear. The girl in the corner was now hunched over, her body shuddering, her breathing ragged as if she were trying to hold herself together. The air between them all felt thick, charged with an ancient tension that made Harper's skin burn. You think you can save her? Emma's voice was a soft hiss, carrying an undertone of something ancient and cruel. She leaned closer, her breath cold against Harper's ear. You think you can waltz in here and undo centuries of hunger, of thirst for power? You think you are the one in control? Harper jerked her arm back, trying to free herself from Emma's grasp, but the teen's grip tightened, her fingers like a vice. Let go of me, Harper demanded, voice strained. Emma's face twisted into a sadistic smile. I don't think you understand, detective. You're already too late. There was a sudden crack in the air, sharp and loud, like the sound of a tree limb snapping in a storm. Harper's head whipped toward the sound. Came from the girl. The frail, terrified girl was standing now, her body trembling uncontrollably as a dark red energy seemed to pulse from her very skin. It was as if she were awakening. Her eyes glowed a dim, unnatural red, and Harper felt her pulse quicken in a mixture of dread and awe. No, the girl whispered, her voice hoarse and strained. It's too late for me. It's too late for all of us. Harper felt a knot tighten in her chest. The girl wasn't speaking to her. She was speaking to the darkness itself. Emma stepped back, her smile growing wider. You see, Harper. You think this is about us? She gestured to herself and Caleb. You think we're the ones you should be worried about. But the truth is, she paused, her grin widening. We were never the ones in control. Harper's stomach churned as realization dawned. The twins, Emma and Caleb, hadn't been merely manipulating the girl. They were subservient. to whatever dark force that had claimed them, whatever thing had lured them into this insidious pact. They were feeding something older than either of them. And now, Harper was caught in the middle of it. The girl raised her hands slowly, her eyes vacant yet burning with an intense, feverish light. A low, guttural sound filled the room, vibrating the very walls. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to crawl toward her, their edges stretching like dark fingers reaching for her flesh. Harper's breath caught in her throat. No, this was not happening. The girl's voice grew louder, more desperate. "You don't understand," she gasped. This isn't just about them. It's a curse. Pact, a deal we made. But it's too much. We're all trapped." Harper took a slow step back, her heart pounding, her instincts screaming for her to run. But there was nowhere to go. The shadows were closing in. The air grew thick with a palpable sense of malice, a suffocating force that made it feel like the walls were pressing in on her from every angle. "It's too late to undo it," the girl continued, her voice barely a whisper now, as though she were speaking to herself rather than Harper. "They've bound us to something ancient, something hungry. And if it doesn't get fed, it consumes us all." The girl's body jerked, her eyes rolling back as if the force controlling her were taking hold once more. Emma and Caleb stood back, watching with twisted satisfaction. Caleb's eyes, wide with panic, flicked nervously between Harper and the girl. "Is she possessed?" Harper choked, her voice trembling. Emma gave a cruel laugh. "Possessed? Oh, detective, no. Not possessed." The girl made the mistake of thinking she could escape this. We all did. She met Caleb's eyes, and for a moment, there was an eerie understanding between them. "The curse isn't about control," Emma continued. "It's about blood. About the sacrifices we make to stay alive." Harper shook her head, her thoughts muddled. "Blood? You're saying?" Emma's eyes flashed red, just for a split second before she leaned in close. "We didn't make the pact. But we are the ones paying for it. We're the ones feeding it. Feeding him. And when the blood stops, when we run out of victims, it turns on us." The girl screamed. It was a horrible, guttural sound that seemed to shake the very foundation of the house. Her body arched violently, the shadows twisting around her like a living thing. "Please," she screamed, her voice cracking. "Please stop." Harper's legs buckled under the pressure of the dark energy suffocating the room. Her hand shot out, instinctively reaching for the girl. She couldn't let them be consumed. But Emma was faster. With a fluid, terrifying motion, she blocked Harper's path, her fingers twitching as if she were about to strike. "Stay out of this, detective," she said in a voice that could freeze blood. Harper stood her ground. "This ends now, Emma." Emma's eyes flashed with dark amusement. "You think it's that simple? You think you can fix this? You have no idea what you're dealing with." But before Harper could respond, the air shifted again. Darker, colder, heavier. The shadows grew hungry, their forms taking shape like twisted faces pressing against the walls. They were coming for all of them. The girl let out a choked sob as she fell to her knees, her hands grasping at the air as if she were trying to pull something from it, something that was not meant to be touched. Harper lunged forward, her heart racing, but Emma stepped forward again, her hand raised, as though controlling the shadows themselves. "You really don't get it, do you?" Emma whispered. "This is how it ends, detective. This is how it all ends." Harper's pulse quickened as the room seemed to close in on her. The darkness was suffocating, the air thick with the stench of decay and death. But in the midst of it all, Harper could hear the girl's voice breaking through the chaos. "He's coming. He's coming." Harper's blood ran cold. The force that had haunted the twins, the one they had fed for so long, it was finally breaking free, and there was no one left to stop it. The room felt like it was collapsing. The very air shimmered with the weight of something otherworldly, pressing down on Harper with a force that stole her breath. The shadows that had once been confined to the corners of the room now wriggled and writhed like living tendrils, reaching for her, reaching for everyone. The dark energy thrummed in the air, suffocating and suffused with an ancient hunger. Harper's heart slammed against her ribs as she took a step back, glancing at the girl, whose body had gone slack, her head hanging limply. The girl's once glowing eyes were now closed, her body shuddering in a final pitiful attempt to escape the agony that tore through her. Then it happened. A deep, guttural growl emanated from the shadows, an unnerving sound that made Harper's skin crawl. It wasn't just the shadows that were coming alive now. It was the very darkness itself, pushing its way out from the walls, from the cracks in the floor. It was him. The thing that had bound the twins and the girl to its will. From the depths of the inky blackness, something began to emerge. At first it was small, just a flicker of movement like the twisting of a shadow. But then it grew larger, its shape becoming clearer and more terrifying. It was as though the darkness itself had formed a body, a hulking, monstrous shape with glowing red eyes, its form twisted and broken, like a thing that had been drawn from the deepest corners of nightmares. Harper's breath caught in her throat. There were no words to describe what she was seeing. It was beyond comprehension. The creature, the thing, lifted its head, its mouth gaping open, filled with rows of jagged teeth, sharp and elongated. The scent of decay filled the air, and Harper's stomach churned at the sight. She could see the remnants of the girl's blood dripping from the thing's gaping maw, pooling around its feet like a sacrifice. "You fed it," Harper whispered in horror, her voice trembling. Emma and Caleb stood frozen, their expressions wild, desperate. Caleb was shaking. His lips parted as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Emma, however, was eerily calm, watching the creature with a kind of reverence. "It's too late," Emma said softly, her voice distant. "We have to feed it. It's the only way to survive. The pact. It's all we've ever known." Harper's mind raced, desperate to make sense of what was happening. You made a deal with this thing. This monster." Emma's eyes flicked toward her, a flicker of something dark passing through them. "We didn't have a choice, Harper. We were born into this." Caleb spoke up, his voice barely a whisper. "It's not just a monster. It's an ancient force. A hunger that's been alive for centuries. We were supposed to die, but it offered us life, power, gave us life, but it came at a cost. And now we're too far gone." The creature let out a low, guttural growl, its eyes fixated on the girl. The bloodied pool around its feet grew wider, and Harper could see its thirst, its hunger, pressing against the very fabric of the room. "It's too late," Emma said again, her voice trembling for the first time. "The price is too high." The shadows writhed violently, as though the creature was trying to pull itself free from some invisible restraint. And then Harper saw it. The shadows were no longer simply shadows. They were alive. Each tendril was a reflection of the creature's hunger, and they had come to claim everything. "No," Harper breathed, her voice filled with rising panic. She felt a surge of adrenaline and dread as she realized what was happening, what had been happening all along. The girl's body jerked again, her eyes snapping open as the darkness swarmed around her. She let out a choked scream, a horrible sound that seemed to echo off the walls, filling the room with despair. Then, in one swift motion, the creature lunged, its massive form pushing through the shadows like a tidal wave. Harper's mind screamed at her to run, to do anything to stop this, but her body was frozen in place, rooted to the floor by the weight of the terror that gripped her. The creature's claws reached toward the girl, its jagged fingers piercing her skin. Harper's heart pounded as she watched in horror, unable to look away, even as the girl's screams grew louder, more frantic. But just as the creature's hand made contact with her, something unexpected happened. The girl's body began to glow, bright, blindingly so. Her form expanding in an impossible way, as though she were becoming something other than human. The glow intensified, pushing the creature back, forcing the shadows to recoil. Harper blinked, trying to process what she was seeing. Was the girl fighting back? Then, with an earth-shattering scream, the girl surged upward, the energy inside her erupting like a force of nature. The room shook violently, the walls cracking under the pressure. The creature roared, its form disintegrating into a whirlwind of shadows as the girl's glow reached a fever pitch. For a moment everything was still. The shadows hung in the air like smoke, and the girl stood, breathing heavily, her eyes glowing a deep, unsettling red. Harper blinked, disoriented, as the room seemed to return to some semblance of normalcy. The creature was gone. The darkness had receded. But the girl was not the same. Harper's voice was hoarse as she spoke. What did you do?" The girl turned toward her, her expression cold and distant. "I broke the pact." She looked at Emma and Caleb, her gaze filled with pity and contempt. "You were too weak to break free. I am not. I was never meant to be part of this. I'm ending it." Emma's face twisted with fury. "You think you can destroy him? You think you can just erase centuries of power?" The girl's lips curled into a sad, bitter smile. "I already have." With that, she turned and began walking toward the door. Caleb took a step forward, his face pale, his eyes wide with terror. "You can't leave. You can't." But before he could say another word, the girl stopped, turning to face him. "I'm done," she said, her voice sharp. "You were never the victims, Emma. You never understood what you were dealing with." She turned her back on them, walking toward the exit. Harper, still in shock, slowly made her way toward the girl, her mind struggling to catch up with the events unfolding before her. The girl's transformation, her ability to break the pact, was something far beyond anything Harper had ever imagined. And yet, as she stood there, Harper couldn't help but wonder, had they truly escaped? Was this really the end of the nightmare? Or had the girl simply become something worse? As the girl disappeared into the night, the last words she spoke echoed in Harper's mind. "You were never the victims. We all played the part, until our dark secret was exposed." And in that moment, Harper realized the terrifying truth. The game was never over.